You're right, it's that time again. It's time to learn. Hi there, Andy Malone, Microsoft MVP, as well as a Microsoft Certified Trainer. Welcome back to the channel. This time, I thought we'd take a look at Azure Active Directory Conditional Access. I realize I've not looked at it for quite some time. There's been a few changes in it. So we're going to talk about identity protection as well as conditional access. I will also mention, as I said, some of those cool new features. Now, as always, I love your comments, questions, and feedback. So please get them down below to me. And if you've not subscribed, of course, then please go ahead, click on that subscribe button, ring that bell, and you won't miss out on any of my future postings. Okay, so without further ado, let's get to the demo. Okay, to kick off, we're in the Azure Active Directory Admin Center. And what I'm going to go is into Azure Active Directory, first of all. And in here, I'm going to scroll down till we get to the security node, or blade as it's known. Clicking into the security blade, I can see I've got conditional access. Now, before I get into conditional access, one of the kind of things that you really want to do is talk about identity protection, because identity protection on its own is great, but when you combine it with conditional access, it's really good. So just a quick run through of identity protection here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click into one of three policies. So I've got a user risk policy. So how risky is this particular user? I can do a sign-in risk policy. So how risky is the user signing in? And I can also do or create a default multi-factor authentication policy as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first of all go into the user risk policy, and essentially I'm going to click into my users. Now here in my users, I've selected three of my most important members of staff. So for you, this could be your managing director, your CEO, your IT officer, your accountant, something like that. Because typically when we talk about threats within an organization, phishing attacks and so on, spear phishing, these are the normal targets. So these are the accounts that are going to get hacked more than other regular accounts. So you want to protect these accounts as much as possible. So what I've done here is I've actually placed these users, I've just selected these users, and I give them a status of high risk. And what we can then do is we can say if there are any issues later, it will require a password change, and you can see I've enforced that policy. Now we can also come down to the sign-in risk policy here. And again, I've selected those same users because, of course, these users could be signing in remotely, for example. And I can then say, yeah, they're high risk. But this time, because they're coming in remote, I'm going to say, actually, I do require multi-factor authentication for these users. Remember, multi-factor authentication can reduce your potential risk surface attack area by up to 95%. In fact, I would actually argue it's more than that, to be honest. So those are the things that I've done. We can come back to this a little bit later. Now, there are various reports that you can look at, which is great, and that's great. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back to that security node, and now I'm going to go into conditional access. Again, just before I go into conditional access, I just want to make you aware of this new feature in Microsoft 365, currently in preview. It's called Continuous Access Evaluation. And what this does is it basically says if a user's access is removed or the user's IP address suddenly changes, Continuous Access Evaluation will automatically and immediately block access to the account and any applications in real time. This is a fantastic security feature. Again, you could select in either individual users, or in this case, as you've seen, I can just do it on a per group basis. So that is a really nice, very, very good feature. It's called Continuous Access Evaluation. So coming up to the topic of today's chat, this of course is conditional access. Now, conditional access, obviously you're aware that, you know, when you walk into a building, or let's say for example, I walk into an airport, I have my passport and I have my ticket, which gets me into the airport. Now, within the confines of the airport, of course, there are areas where you can't go. And you'll have noticed that members of staff have ID badges and they normally punch in a PIN key, a PIN code, and these get them into sensitive areas. So conditional access is a little bit like that. Once you've been authenticated, you can then put additional safeguards in place. All right. So just before we go in and create some policies, let me talk about some of the settings. So one of the things that you might want to set up is something called a named location. Now, a named location can either be managed by a country location or an IP address range, and you can also have let's say multi-factor authentication range of trusted IP addresses. IP address locations are quite good. So for example, if you've got an office in Manchester or an office in New York, you can add those IP address ranges here. And if you're enforcing multi-factor authentication, it can bypass for those safe locations. And that makes it a lot more convenient for your users because they're already in a trusted location. Okay. We also have a new feature here called custom controls. So the way that this works is I simply click onto here and you can see that it's offering me a blank JSON web token. Now there are a number of vendors that are integrating with conditional access. So what you need to do is find out your security vendor, and they will have a conditional access JSON token. So all you do here is simply delete this, paste in theirs, and click on create. And then it will create a conditional access token, let's say for Sage accounting or Cisco firewalls or something like that. All right. So that's a really nice feature that. Terms of use. Obviously, when your users are signing in from outside, it's a really good idea that you have your terms and conditions. So before they can get access to the resources, it pops up on screen, just says, look, these are acceptable terms and conditions. Do you agree? And then you would say, yes, I agree, or don't agree. Okay. If you want your users to come in through a virtual private network, then this is really nice. You can come in here. I can generate a digital certificate. So remember, when users authenticate with a username and password, if they're using, let's say, a corporate device, this digital certificate, you can download this, install that certificate on the mobile device. So when the device connects, it's authentic because it has this digital ID. Very similar to let's say a passport. Yes. So it's been issued by a trusted authority, and it's very good. Okay. We also have a new feature called Authentication Context here. So Authentication Context is great. This is used for applications and actions within major applications like SharePoint and so on. And it deals with, let's say, sensitive data. So what's the context of the data running through that application? So you can say, right, I can say, yes, you know, if I have an application, let's say SharePoint, and I've got a conditional access policy, I can then say, yeah, I'm going to say that this has been authorized. My data is sensitive, but it's authorized to run through this SharePoint application. All right, so so it means security context. And so what I've just done here is I've just set one up here. So I've just called it Norway authorized, and you'll see that in a moment when I create a conditional access policy. So coming down, then I'm going to go back and I'm going to go, that's my basic things that I've set up. All right. Classic policies, by the way, refers to very old Azure policies that you maybe created years back. Okay. So what I'm doing now is I'm going into my conditional access policies and I'm going to create a new policy. Now, I live in a place called Stirling in Scotland, so I'm going to say this is my Stirling apps policy. Okay. Oops, would help if I spelt it correctly. Right, okay, this is my Stirling apps policy, and I can go ahead and select either all users, I can say users and groups. I can create a policy for just guest and any external users. This is particularly useful if you're using things like Microsoft 365 groups or let's say Microsoft Teams. You can also create policies for various directory roles as well. So for example, if you're a user administrator, then you might want the user administrator to use multi-factor authentication and so on. And I can also do it for specific users and groups here as well. So I can either go through specific users or I can just type in a group name. So in this case, I'm going to connect to the sales team. I'm going to create an access policy for the sales team. So, so that's the who. So I've selected the users and the groups here. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come down into conditions now. Well, actually, just before I do that, so first of all, my users and groups, I've selected my users and groups here, and now it says, okay, what applications? Okay, so the conditional access is for what? Now, you can do this in one of a couple of ways. I can say all cloud apps. So I'm creating a policy that impacts all cloud applications. Or maybe it's just selected applications. So in this case, you can see I now get a list, or I will get a list in a moment, of the various applications. Okay, so you can see I've got a list of various apps here. So for example, I could say Box. Yes, I want to create a conditional access, or maybe I can say I'll create one for LinkedIn. Okay, so I'm going to create a policy for LinkedIn. Now please note that you can select either applications or cloud apps, but check this out. You can also create conditional access policies based on user actions and authenticate or application context. So remember what I said? Here's my Norway authorized. So I can create a application or a policy for, let's say, SharePoint, and I know that this is running, let's say, sensitive data through that. So that's the new authentication context. So when we talk about user actions, I can say, okay, select the action. I can say register the user's security or the device's security information. And I can also, this device or user needs to join a device, okay, register or join a device to the organization. All right. So for the purpose of this demo, I'm going to use Cloud Apps, and I'm just going to stick with LinkedIn. So we've got the who, so the sales group using LinkedIn, and they must meet these conditions. The user risk, remember that, the identity protection. So if I click into this, I'm going to say hi, I'm going to say configure, and I'm going to say, in fact, will I say, I'm going to say excludes medium and high. Okay, so I'm going to say medium and high, or I'm including medium and high risk in my policy. Sign-in risk. So again, I can say yes if my users have a high or medium sign-in risk, and if they're coming in on a particular platform. So for example, I could include any device or specific devices, or I can exclude a specific device as well. So I'm going to say, I'm going to include these device platforms. So I'm going to say Android and iOS devices. I'm going to say exclude a trusted location. So I can actually choose a trusted location here. Now you'll notice that I'm excluding the trusted location. So I'm having my users come in on conditional access. If they're using LinkedIn, the condition is that they must be using these apps, but it excludes the trusted location. I bet you know what's going to happen next, right? Okay, so client apps. In this case, I'm only going to allow browser and mobile apps, but I'm not going to allow older clients. The reason being is these older clients don't require multi-factor authentication, and actually that's a real major security risk. So these particular users, if they meet these specific actions, let's say this particular app, so I've got my sales group who are using LinkedIn, they must meet these conditions, and if they do, I'm going to either grant or block access. So in this case, I'm going to block access, but it requires multi-factor authentication. Now remember what I said, it excludes that condition. So remember the condition of the trusted location. So my users would not be prompted if they were in a trusted location. All right. So again, there are a number of other options here as well that you can also do. All right. You can either have multiple controls or you can have individual ones. And in this case, I've chosen just an individual one. So the who, the what, the how, the where, and again, finally, you can control the session as well. So do you want to use what we call conditional access app control? So in this case, conditional access app control, you might say if they're using Box or LinkedIn, they're not allowed to download any files. So they can only view the files online. So that's what we mean by that. You can also control the sign-in frequency as well. So, for example, if you were in a bank, you might not want the browser to remember you. So I'm sure that you've logged into your browser recently, you've gone to Microsoft 365, and it's automatically logged you in. If you were in a bank, you might not want that. You might want the user to be logged in. So I could say, after 30 minutes, so you can either do it for days or hours there as well. The other thing that you can also do, you can do something called a persistent browser session. Now, you'll notice that the persistent browser session here is actually grayed out. And the reason for that is because the apps option that I've chosen, if I just go to this, you'll notice I'm only choosing one app. It's because it's a browser cookie. So you're controlling the cookie lifetime within a browser. And the problem is the browser cannot differentiate between one app or all apps. So in this case, you would need to do all cloud apps for this to work. So if I go back into this policy and if I scroll down to session controls, you can now see that this is now active. So it means, do you want me to always retain the cookie or never retain the cookie? So in other words, this is again an additional security feature. So that's the difference between the frequency and persistent browsing. Okay. Fantastic. So there you have it. A little bit of conditional access. Now, if I just head back to my conditional access policy here, you'll notice that it says report only. So that policy is set to report only, which is great. And this is almost like a try before you buy type scenario. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and switch this policy on, bearing in mind, of course, it's only for that group of users. So you can have many conditional access policies for both users, groups, and devices. So once the policy is set up, another thing that you can use is this what if option at the top here. And what if is exactly as it says on the tin. So I can select a user from that group and say, hey, if this user is using this particular app from this particular IP address, using this particular device, etc. I'm sure you get the idea. What if? So what would the conditional access policy look like and how would it affect that user? So that's a really, really cool feature actually. I love that what if option. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, just a little bit about conditional access. So there you have it, Azure Active Directory Conditional Access. Very cool. Now, if you've got questions, comments, feedback, or if you've got suggestions about future topics that you're interested in, then please get them down below and I'll do my best to answer them for you. And of course, if you've not subscribed to the channel, I would really appreciate not only that you hit that subscribe button, ring that bell, but also please like and share the videos as well. All right. Thank you so much for dropping by. And I will see you next time. All right, you stay safe. Take care. Thanks for dropping by. Hope you enjoyed the video. Go ahead and click on the subscribe button and ring that bell and you won't miss a thing. See you next time.